Last sermon I took, I mentioned that I really didn't like change. And for any of you who know me, that is very, very true. Change and I do not mix whatsoever. And it's been a really big week for me. This week, for those who are friends with me on Facebook, I found out that Sanitarium had stopped making honey wheats. This was devastating to me. This was like a childhood cereal that we grew up, and Mum would buy boxes at Big Camp. And that's all we would eat, the whole of Big Camp, morning, noon, and night, honey wheats. And all of a sudden, they're gone. And then I walk into Woolworths this week and find out my favourite yogurt's just been completely taken off the shelves from Woolworths and Coles. Sizzler's shutting down at Annerley this week, which is a favourite place of mine, the cheesy toast. All these things are changing. And this week, I found out my dearest wife has been replacing household items in our house with organic, eco-friendly Fruit Loop kind of, she's cleaning dishes now with pretty much glorified orange juice. I'm like, where are the chemicals to clean? Why is everything changing around me? But then I realized sometimes change can be a wonderful thing and is actually quite needed for us to have that relationship with God. Dear Heavenly Father, be with us this morning as we look at you, we look at our families, we look at how being a servant to others around us is actually the most important thing. And you said that to us so many times. Be with us and help us to try and learn something more about ourselves today as we go through this. In your name, amen. The sermon I'm going to preach today, I entitled it My Fruit Salad Family, which I'll get to, but it is based on the most boring book of the Bible. So bear with me on this one. If I actually said to you, open up your Bibles and let's start reading, Matthew 1, the first 16 chapters, what would actually happen? I'll tell you what would happen. It's not that. Can you skip over one extra slide there to the verse? Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat Judas and his brethren and Jesus. There's a lot of begatting going on in the Bible. There's a lot. And you go through these 16 verses and you wonder, why did Matthew start what is one of the most amazing books of the Bible, telling the most amazing story? The story of Jesus coming to earth, living a life as a human, dying for us, being raised from the dead. And he starts off this book with the most boring chapter in the Bible. How many people actually go and actively read Matthew 1? There's not one, not even the pastors. Like, how many people actually go and have you ever read all of it? And if so, why? Was it because Pathfinders forced you to? School? A Bible study group? Why would you actually go and read this? It's actually so boring. Also last time I think I started my sermon with a quote from the Pope. This time I decided to go a little bit more Adventist and go with The Simpsons. This chapter was actually brought up in The Simpsons. Season 20, yes, they've been around that long. Season 20, episode 1. Poor old Homer here and Ned get trapped in this cement. And to pass the time, almost to put themselves to sleep, Ned over here starts reciting Matthew chapter 1. Homer, that's his face, is so bored by it and wants to get out of there so quickly. When the police come and say, we will have to take you away, he starts negotiating, saying, please, lock me up for life. Just get me out of here right now. He was that bored by Matthew chapter 1. Families can explain a lot about who you are. Who here would actually raise their hand and say, you have a wonderful family with no skeletons in the closet? Like, this just, really? Do you know your father? I know your dad. There are skeletons. Seriously, who here has a family that is just absolutely perfect. Nothing has ever gone wrong in it. There's never been arguments. There's never been any disagreements. There's been no divorces or deaths or anything that has upset your family tree that wasn't expected. For me, if you know myself and my brother, most people look at us and decide that one of us is adopted. And they're trying to work out which one because we are so completely different in looks, in how we in lots of different areas. And you wonder, how did two boys grown up with presumably the same parents end up in the same house for their entire lives and turn out to see things so very differently? What is it about our genetics and our family tree that shape who we actually are? When Matthew starts this book, it may sound boring, but he is setting up the most wonderful story that was ever written in the Bible. He's setting it up to really know why it all happened. Where did it all start? Why did God choose this family tree? We have a weird group of people in this church. Instantly, you probably don't know who I'm talking about because there's quite a few. But this particular case, I'm talking about the Bernards and the Morgan family. Do you know these people? Yes. The ones I'm talking about specifically are sitting up the back there if you want to know who they are. Now, when we're talking about family, and I started thinking about family trees, the Morgan and Bernard family are quite interesting. They're plain weird. Because what actually happened was Chris and Dan, so these are not related people. Chris is Bernard, Dan is a Morgan. And they were working, I believe, for my father-in-law at the time, dear old Pete Bacon. It's amazing how almost everything weird and bad starts somehow working for Pete Bacon. Anyway, Dan and Chris are working for Pete. And Pete goes, "You guys are both single. You both got sisters. Do the math, work something out here. You could fix a few problems." So Chris starts dating Kelly, Dan's sister. 2-3 weeks later, I believe, Dan decides, hey, that's working out okay. I'll date your sister, Chris. So all of a sudden, you've now got the two, brother and sister dating the other brother and sister. You think, okay, they'll work this out. This is a little bit weird. But no, it continues. They even get married. They even start repopulating the earth in this context. I mean, Chris knew that at some point somebody was going to date and marry his little sister. First of all, he had to get over the fact it was Dan Morgan. That is a big hurdle in life. Secondly, he had to realize that now Dan was going to be his brother-in-law, whichever way you look at it. Their children are cousins, again, whichever way you look at it. All of the cousins there out of those guys share the same grandparents. Who else has that here? Surely there's got to be more people than that. It's got to be common. Are you serious? Ray? Just going to revise my sermon here for 1 second. I had it set up, these were just so unique and weird. Ray. Oh, wow. Thank you, Dan. But yeah, Tarlo, Levi, Lexi, as cousins now, they get together for Christmas and like, where are the other grandparents? Oh no, there are none. This is it. Well, many years ago, I had a really good friend. She used to come to Springwood here, and she and her husband come regularly, actually, when Max is playing, because they help out with the band. I promised her I wouldn't say names, but I used to call her family a fruit salad. And that was just our running in joke, because at the time, my family was what I believed quite normal. We had no deaths that I could remember in our family. My father's parents died when I was 5 or 6. I was very young, and I don't remember it really. Nothing really weird had happened in my family. There had been no divorces anywhere in my family. There had been no deaths anywhere in my family. There had been no changes to my family situation. And this girl, my friend, I would call her family fruit salad because she had stepped this and half that, and, marriages that had combined and changed and moved around. And to me, it just seemed like a fruit salad. I don't like fruit salad. I actually hate fruit salad. Fruity. And she would come along and we would talk about her family and realize and over time, you started realizing that having a family that wasn't exactly how you pictured it as a kid wasn't that weird of a thing to have. As I said, my family all of a sudden changed now, and I have my stepmom in the congregation today and my dad. I went from having a family that really had nothing go on to having grandparents die, uncles die, divorces in the family. I had my mum die. I had my dad remarry my mum's best friend. I now have stepbrothers and stepsisters. I have an adopted step-nephew, I think. I think that's correct. Adopted step-nephew. At one point, I was actively trying to date the woman who would end up becoming my stepsister. Yeah. Really, Ray, you? Thankfully, that never worked out. My advances were rejected, and we can now just be brother and sister without any weirdness going on between us. It's amazing how families change and you adapt. I truly love our family. I love getting together at Christmas times and stuff now and seeing all the variations we have in the family. And I look back and go, why did God put in Matthew 1 the family history of Jesus, which I think it's safe to assume we all agree is quite a messed up family tree? When you have your family tree and people ask you who, where you've come from, where your family are from, all these different things, do you often put your hand up and tell them about the worst of your family? Oh yeah, like I've got a murderer, my uncle, yeah, he's still in prison. That's actually not true. I'm just saying as an example, you don't normally go ahead and start telling everybody about the worst people in your family. You start looking at the positives. Oh, I've got royalty 16 generations down somewhere, through 7 different marriages and 3 different step-cousins, and you're trying to bring out the best of it. For our family, our claim to fame was we're related to Bert Hinkler, who's an aviator, and Justin's Park down at Burleigh Heads, if you've ever been to Justin's Park, that's my park, sort of, not really. Some person way back in our lineage planted some trees around there and they named the park after them. But you don't start clawing back and finding out the worst. Why? Why don't we advertise that? They're still your family. Why don't you get up and say all of the worst of your family just as well as the best of them? And again, you go back and read Matthew 1. And what has God done? He's laid it out. Warts and all, this family tree that is Jesus. You look at Jesus' family tree, and it doesn't matter if you get it from Luke or Matthew, and they're 2 quite different lists out of interest. And lots of different reasons why people think they're very different, either the mother's side or Mary's side or Joseph's side, legal versus biological. There's lots of different reasons. But either way, you go through that list and you have slave owners, you have murderers, you have kings that were evil. It's a scandalous list. It's a list that has people you wouldn't want to be related to. And here Jesus, he could have chosen any family in the world to be brought into. Any. And he specifically chose this line. What is more interesting is there are 5 women mentioned in this family tree. 4 outside of Mary, his mother. 4 women. Why? In Jewish culture, this was a very uncommon thing. If you ever went back and looked through the family tree, you would only see men. You would only see the fathers to their eldest son, to their eldest son, and it would keep going down the line. But for some particular reason, Matthew, Luke, all decide to add these 4 very special women into this family tree. Who are they? They must be wonderful women. They must be brilliant women if Jesus decided they are important enough to be listed as part of his family tree. He didn't have to. He could have just gone Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and just kept going down the line. But instead, he specifically put these women in. Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute and sleeps with her father-in-law. They have twins. Of these 2 twins, Perez is the ancestor of Salmon, who married Rahab. Rahab is better known by her occupation. Who was Rahab? What was she? She was a prostitute. She turns her life around, joins Israel, has a son by an Israelite man. That son grows up to become very, very important to the next lady in the list, which is Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite. The whole group of Moabites came from Abraham's nephew Lot after he was raped by his daughters. Moabites were so despised at the time that they weren't even allowed in the Lord's assembly. And here Jesus is listing down in his family tree, Ruth. Which then brings us, she ends up, out of interest, Ruth ends up being the great-grandfather of a guy you read about a little bit in the Bible called David. Which then brings us to the 4th woman. Cue the Barry White music. David sees Bathsheba, the woman who he then commits adultery with, covers his tracks by trying to trick her husband into going to fight in the front line, getting him killed. And from there, these 4 women, so uniquely placed in the middle of this family tree, all interconnected and related to each other, all have backstories that make your hair stand up. Jesus was making a massive point. My opinion, that it was a massive point that he specifically put these women and this particular family tree together. God works best with those who are not full of themselves. He works best with those who have seen the worst and have come through it. Who have been able to look at evil in the face and get through it. To be able to call on him and get through anything that life has thrown at them. The verse for today that I had there was, whoever is the greatest should be the servant of others. If you put yourself above others, you will be put down. But if you humble yourself, you will be honored. This is a really tough thing, and it's a really tough thing to teach kids as well. I have 2 children, and my eldest, my daughter Eloise, it's really tough in school. These days you often go to school races and stuff, and it's all about great work for participating. Well done, you ran. You came 10 minutes behind the last guy, but good job anyway. Back when we went to school, all those decades ago now, you got patted on the back if you came first. A little bit of a thumbs up if you came second, a wink if you came third, and if you didn't get on the podium, it didn't matter. No one cared. It was all about winning, doing your best. Then we had all these new age teachers come in and decide that it was nice just to pat everyone on the back. And so now I'm trying to bring up my daughter going, what is best? Is it right to try and teach her to try and succeed, to win those races, or to not? And there might be times where she, the night before a race, is in a room quite upset because she has a fear of not winning the next day because she won it the last time she ran it. And we're like, no. So we take her to that race that next day, and my wife and I are both saying, let's pray that she loses. Let's just, a little bit of, bring her down just a little bit. And then she goes and wins again. Like, seriously, stop being successful, woman. What's right? What's wrong? How do we try and bring in this humility, bring in success and all these different things into our children's lives, into our own lives? This may shock some of you, but it has been noted in my lifetime that I believe the word is a healthy ego. That is what my friends tell me when they're being nice. This has not always been the case. My mother once told me that for the first 22 minutes of my life, I had no ego. But at 22 minutes into it, I decided that the attention must be on me, and it never stopped. Thanks, Mum. More importantly, 20-odd years ago, my friends bought me this beautiful dressing gown. I still have. I actually forgot to bring it today. I was going to bring it and put it on. This beautiful big dressing gown. And I thought, this is wonderful. Put it on. It was fantastic. It wasn't until a little bit later I actually turned around and found out that on the back it has "The Ego Has Landed" written across the back. Embroidered, properly done, with a matching pair of boxer shorts, which say "The Ego Has Landed" as well. Having that ego, being full of yourself, I am the first to admit, is a struggle. It has been. And I think if there's a lot of people being really honest with yourselves, we crave attention. We are human. We love that attention. Whether or not you put on some nice clothes and walk out and see somebody taking an extra glance at you and go, okay, wow, that's cool. Or you get that pat on the back from the teacher to say, well done, you've done a really good job. I see it in the children. They lap it up. They love thinking that they've done something well. And in work, a client comes to us and says, thank you so much, you guys were just awesome. You get that little tingle up your spine and go, yeah, we did a pretty good job. It's really tough. You think if you came from this particular family, if you don't know who they are, probably time for you to leave. The royal family, and I do like William because he makes me look like I have more hair. This particular family, if you think about their family tree, where do you come up with, or who do you come up with in their family tree? What are some of the people? William looks there, or George, Charlotte, Kate, whoever they are. You think about him going to school to do a show and tell on his family. We've had to do it. What would he come up with? I mean, for him, you've got his grandmother is one of the most, I think, the longest serving monarch. One of the most revered and respected. Can you imagine the size of the funeral for the Queen when she passes away? Showing the amount of respect and love her country and other countries around have had for that woman, who has served and reigned as their monarch for so many decades now. That's his grandma. Of course, if you want to go further back for him, he goes back and he goes, well, I've got King George's, pretty much all of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got, Queen Victoria, lots of King Edwards, King Henry the 3rd, 4th, 5th, Richard the Lionheart, Robert the Bruce, King James, the guy who did the Bible. That's my family. That's my family tree. We look at our family and we go, here, you can see, you probably can't see many of them, but these are just a snapshot of some of the images from William's family. All of whom you would know because they're spoken about in Shakespeare plays, or you learn about them in history from a young age at school, or you have movies made about them, or TV series. Then you have my family. Ellie was asked to do a show and tell at school one day about, picking somebody from a family, something that was interesting. And for us, it's myself and my brother and mum and dad. The most interesting thing was we would go on picnics at the time in a poo brown Tirana. I mean poo brown, as you can see, eating out of our Tupperware containers that mum never went anywhere without. And that was us. That was our family. William goes to school and says, well, if you want to see Grandma, anyone got a £5 note? Anyone got any money? Any coins on you? That's Grandma. Jesus could have chosen a family that was going to be wonderful the whole way through. He had kings, he had princes, he had everything, good, bad, and ugly. Why choose it? Because from the very start, God instilled absolute humility even from Jesus' genealogy. That people could look at him, we can look at Jesus today and go, you know what? You weren't given anything on a silver platter. You didn't have it any easier than the rest of us. You had people in your heritage, in your family line, that were probably so much worse than any of our families. That's who he chose. That's where he wanted us to see him start. Not anywhere else. Nowhere that was nice. It wasn't a Hilton. It wasn't even a 4-star, 4 points by Sheraton. It was a barn filled with animal poo. And that's where he started in this world. He was put in a place, chose to be put in a place, where most of us would be embarrassed to tell other people about our beginnings, about our family. And he owned it. He didn't just run away from it, he embraced it. Got Matthew and Luke to actually write about it. Front and center. You cannot start the Gospels without going through the family tree of Jesus. So many times in the Bible, Jesus would say things like, if you don't change and become like a child, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. That the humble will be exalted and they will serve others. Serve others if you want to be great in my kingdom. How long will it take us to realize that we are perfect the way we are right now? Because we are absolutely moldable by God. Better or worse, doesn't matter. We are who we are, and we are a piece of clay that he can do anything with right now. It doesn't matter where you've come from, who your family is, who your family will be, how much money you have, how much success you have. All these different things make no difference to your relationship to God. Having the ego, thinking that we can do everything ourselves, thinking that we don't need anyone else because we are good enough, is one of, I believe, the biggest tricks the devil uses to get into our lives. Why did he say it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than to go through the eye of a needle? Because as soon as you think you've got it all made, as soon as you think you've got everything that you need, where do you have place to fit God in? God's plan, and something else that I went or got from this family tree, that God's plan is not contingent on our righteousness. It is not contingent on our goodness or our perfection. Ruth worshipped other gods. Tamar seduced her father-in-law. Rahab was a prostitute. But none of that made any difference to God. None. What did it do? It actually helped him. I'm not suggesting we go out and start doing any of these things. But the point was, none of it made any difference to God being able to use them in his work. In fact, they gave Jesus the most perfect family tree he could have wanted. Broken, bruised, battered, been through literal hell and back, but always kept coming back to him. Every time, you name them, David, Ruth, all these different people always came back to God. The Beatles had it wrong when they sang, "All you need is love." Because when you look through this particular family tree, you realize there's only one way to fix it, and that's all you need is him. The thing that I'm struggling to fully grasp sometimes, if I'm being honest, is that greatness in Jesus' eyes is not how many people serve us, but it is how many people we serve. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for a Sabbath we can come and talk about you, a family tree that you've given us that is wondrous when we go through it. It might seem so boring, but when we really delve into it, we realize how much of an influence your hands had in molding each of those people to get down to you being in this earth, being born in that manger, and eventually dying on the cross for us. Thank you for everything you've done for us, and please come into our lives. I know you're waiting for it, but come into our lives, mold us again, and make us part of your family tree. Amen.